Hello again. I'm trying to see the bottom of this thing that looks like a well, here on an excavation site on the Tuscan coast, 86 miles north of Rome. Tim Tatton Brown, co-director of the excavation site, is with me, and he's resourcefully produced a torch, and we can just about see the bottom of the well. The water's shimmering down there, and it's quite a long way down. About how far down is it, Tim?
I should think it's about 15 feet to the level of water. We thought it was a well when we first came here, and a year or so ago, when we were trying to work out the topography of the villa before we'd done a lot of excavation, we were rather puzzled by this, and we wanted to know whether it was a medieval well or possibly a Roman well, and so we sort of opened the lid, as we've just done now, and this echo I found rather odd for a well, and by shining a torch and then climbing in, I soon discovered that it wasn't a well at all, that it was in fact a huge, great underground pair of cisterns.
A sort of reservoir.
Very much so. And in fact, when we got inside, we discovered straight away that they were in fact a pair of Roman cisterns, in very good condition indeed, with the Roman concrete, the opus signinum as it's called, still lining the cisterns and retaining the water just as it is now.
Are the cisterns being used at the moment?
Yes, they're still used for the main water supply, the storage for the house that's on the site just a few yards away from here, the medieval farm that sat on top of the Roman villa at a later date.
It says a lot for Roman concrete, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly does. I mean, it just shows how good this concrete really is, and how, if it's not destroyed and cracked and so on, how it can survive really forever.
Now, just put this back. And we won't fall in. It certainly chose a wonderful site for this villa. It's on a hilltop with a commanding view out across the valley, and you can also see the old Roman road that runs through the valley to the Roman colony of Cosa, right on the coast. The villa itself is huge. It's nearly 300 yards across, and bigger in area, I believe, than the Roman palace at Fishbourne. On one side you've got the farm buildings and slave quarters, and on the other the workshops and the industrial area. And right here in the middle, the part where the Roman senator and his family lived in grand style about 2,000 years ago. Tim, you've got about 70 people rushing around here with wheelbarrows and shovels and trowels, working away and spending a great deal of time and money. But I thought that we knew quite a lot about Roman villas, particularly in Italy, so why all this interest here?
Well, in fact, we don't know a lot about Roman villas. Surprisingly enough, the villas of Italy are fairly well known in the area around Naples, where they've been studied really in conjunction with the excavations at Pompeii, and quite a few great rural villas have been partly dug there. But elsewhere, very, very little excavation of Roman villa has taken place. And it's only here, up in the area north of Rome, where virtually no Roman villas have been excavated in any great detail, that we're now actually starting a new project to discover really as much as we can about villas in the widest sense. Not just the great building in the centre, the luxury building with its mosaics and wall plaster, but very much what the villa was existing on, the economy, the surrounding area, how it replaced the earlier settlements on this site or in this area, what it was replaced by, and every aspect of the villa economy and the villa in its widest setting.
Another unique aspect of this dig, Tim, is the fact that you've got British and Italian students working together down in the trenches.
What is very new is, in fact, having an excavation of a very large Roman site, which is being dug entirely by students. And to have a joint excavation, a British and Italian one, combining British and Italian techniques, new techniques, is really very exciting indeed. We have here a very large team, and many of them aren't archaeologists at all, in fact. And this is typical of the modern excavation. Apart from the students who are digging, and this is of course partly a training excavation, we've got environmental archaeologists or ecologists, some of them like to call themselves. We have conservators who are lifting and restoring the wall plaster, and many others who do work sort of on the sidelines and who do field survey and things like that. But it's all part of the excavation itself.
Professor Andrea Carandini, how would you say this joint excavation was working out?
It seems to me beautifully. Really, I had no problem at all I try to always to put, as the direction is Italian and British, the site supervisors, are generally one Italian, one British, and all the operations, the washing of the classification of the pottery, and all this we try always to mix, so to force in a way, or to make it easy that the people could understand each other and could work together. In Italy we have a sort of very aristocratic culture, and what is manual labor has always been considered something which is despisable. And so when I introduced this way of digging in Italy, I really feared that the Italians may not stand the work. And at the first blisters, and their hands would escape immediately home to their mother. And instead, evidently, we were completely wrong, and the students are working as well as the British, it seems to me, and I think in Italy there is a great curiosity upon this new way of conceiving archaeology.
We've come now from the main part of the villa, and we've walked across to the north side to an area that you call the industrial part, Tim, of this huge villa complex. We've walked into a room that you've excavated down to the floor level. What, in fact, was going on in this room?
Well, when we excavated this room last year, we weren't very clear, and just where we're standing now, we found some large stones, and we saw that there was some sort of structure here, again, not really understanding what it was. Then the breakthrough came really a week or so ago, when in the room next door, just here, you can see in front of
those 3 steps there.
Just up those 3 very fine and very good condition steps, is a room at a higher level, which in it has 3 great presses, or the remains of 3 great presses. First of all, at the far side of the room, you can see large rectangular stones set in the ground with 2 holes in them. These holes were for great wooden uprights. Immediately in front of that, you see a circular structure with a little channel running round it in a perfect circle. And in fact, this is the press itself. There was a wooden press on here, and the 2 uprights behind it would have between it a great bar which would come across the press. It's called a lever press. And then on this side of the press, there would be the slaves would be pulling the bar down and crushing what were probably olives on the presses.
From that circular press, there are channels cut into the floor that seem to be draining towards a small pipe set in the far wall. What was that?
That's right. These are little channels that would take the juice from the olives, probably the olive oil, through the wall, down a little pipe, into the room next door, which we've only partly excavated, but which almost certainly contains a series of vats or settling tanks for the oil.
How significant is this finding?
This is exactly what we wanted. This is another aspect of the villa, and we will now try to excavate the whole area in detail and understand everything we can of the actual work of processing what, as I say, are probably olives in this case. Obviously, the settling tanks, which we haven't really excavated yet in the neighbouring room, where the pipes are leading to, the settling tanks will have a silt on the bottom, which we must study in very great detail, and we must get our environmentalists to look at this in particular, and obviously to take very careful samples. We will sieve every single layer, we will use the flotation machine, and so on.
Look at this wall here, Tim. This is something I didn't expect. It's made of mud, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. This is an exceptional wall. This is the only wall we've got so far made entirely of mud, and probably mud, not just mud bricks. And this is what we would expect from other parts of the villa at the higher levels. The wall here, though, is mud right down to the floor level. And on the outside of the wall, it's covered with the sort of white lime preparation and then wall plaster.
That plaster, remarkably enough, has survived very well.
Yes, that's right. The wall plaster here is not any great importance. It's probably got a little paint on it, but nothing more than that. Some stripes and things like that, because we're in the industrial area. When we come to the main part of the villa, we again have mud walls, and I think most of the ordinary walls of the villa were made of mud in the upper levels. Only the great load-bearing outer walls of the villa were stone right up to the top. and it's the decay of these in the period of abandonment at the end of the villa that meant that the mud sort of comes down rather like an ice cream melting in the sun, and the plaster comes down with it. And this is our great problem in excavating the very fine decorated wall plaster.
Liz Pryor, you're working here on one of the mud walls, and you're taking off what looks like a length of plaster, and you've come to what seems to be a fairly delicate stage.
Yes, I think you're quite right. The main problem is that there's quite a nice division normally between the back of the plaster and the wall, but we've had some kind of, probably an olive tree here.
Oh, I see, the root is growing through the wall.
And it's interfered with the plaster. It's also interfering with, it's tying the plaster quite well to the wall, so it's interfering with our process of taking the plaster off, rather.
Now you're trying to lever it off with that.
A chisel, yes.
It's a chisel, right.
It should normally come very cleanly, rather like this area here, where you can see the backs of the fragments quite clearly outlined. And quite often you can just sort of work your hand behind, but here we have got this problem.
Now, before you chisel it off, you prepare the surface of the plaster in some way. What's that you've got pasted on the front of the plaster?
Oh, well, we clean off the surface of the wall, and in order to hold the fragments together, we put this butter muslin, very nice thin open weave stuff, over the surface, and we stick it on with an adhesive which we can later on dissolve and get off, having kept all the fragments in the right relative positions, hopefully.
Well, now you've got this position where you have an assistant here holding the end of the gauze. You're attacking the part between the plaster and the wall with a chisel, and you've come up against this problem of the root. It'll be interesting to see how you deal with that. I'll just watch.
We'll see what happens. It may all come off in one great beautiful sheet, or it may take hours.
Once you've taken this plaster off with roots and earth and all...
What do we do next with this?
What do you do next with this?
Well, the first thing that has to be done is to take what we call the facing off, which is this muslin or gauze. Then clean the fragments and then stick them together. But the essential thing with doing it like this is that we've kept all the fragments in their right relative positions, so that when we come to actually working on them, we know which ones will go with which. Whereas when fragments are collected from a fallen area, they may have fallen a bit, out of alignment, and they're not exactly with their neighbours.
You obviously have a great deal of faith in what you're going to get as a result of this. To me, it looks as though you'll get a greyish, murky colour. It doesn't look as though there's going to be a wall painting there.
Well, yes, that's because they have got quite a considerable incrustation on the surface, picked up during burial.
So the colour is still there underneath that incrustation?
We hope so, yes. And the problem is getting the incrustation off safely without...
How do you do that?
Well, at the moment we're using a physical method, which is using scalpels.
But it must take an age to scrape away with a scalpel.
Ages.
I mean, when you consider that you've got a fairly big room here and you're dealing with at least a couple of walls of plaster, and you're going to scrape away this entire area with a scalpel.
I'm afraid it does take an awful long time.
But at the end of the day, what have you got? Have you got a wall painting, or have you got 1,000 fragments with little bits of colour?
I think at the end of the day we have got a wall painting. I hope so, anyway.
Liz, if I keep talking to you, this piece of muslin here is going to fall on the ground, and I'm going to be in bad odour. If you'd like to get back to it, I'll just watch from the sidelines here.
Righto. Okay. Now let's see what we can do with this root.
Here.